The House and the Senate are back in session this week. For the House, it's the last week of session before the August recess. The Senate's got one more week to go. In the House, we expect the chamber to consider two bills. One will be a veterans bill, the other is the REINS Act. REINS Act stands for Regulations from the Executives in Need of Scrutiny Act. And what this bill would do is it would give greater congressional oversight to regulations that come out of the executive branch of government. This bill has passed the House on previous occasions, hasn't ever passed the Senate. This year there's a chance that it could pass both chambers. We're keeping a very close eye on this piece of legislation. In the Senate, they're continuing consideration of the highway funding bill. They took votes over the weekend, and in fact on Monday they also had a vote to include language to reauthorize the Export-Import Bank as part of that bill. The key question for this piece of legislation at this point is whether or not the House is going to consider it. The Senate wants to do a long-term highway funding bill. The House wants to do a short-term bill. We have a couple of issues with the legislation. There are some provisions that would pay for the bill that we're concerned with in the Senate. One would require some additional reporting to the IRS on mortgages. The other uses government guarantee fees, an increase in government guarantee fees to pay for the bill. We have confidence that the guarantee fee provision is going to be removed from the bill. The mortgage disclosure provision is more problematic. Still, this bill's got a long way to go before it becomes law. A lot of differences between where the House wants to go and where the Senate wants to go. So it's going to be in play for a little while. On Tuesday, the House Financial Services Committee is going to mark up about a dozen bills, including 4 that would be important removing barriers bills for credit unions. The first one that we're interested in would end Operation Choke Point. This has been, Operation Choke Point is a program that has been conducted by the Department of Justice that has put pressure on credit unions and banks to close certain types of accounts. Most notably gun shop accounts. We oppose Operation Choke Point. We support the legislation. We're grateful that the committee is going to consider it. The second piece of legislation deals with mortgages that are held in portfolio at credit unions and banks. And what this bill would say is that if a credit union or bank holds a mortgage on portfolio, it counts as a qualified mortgage for the purposes of CFPB's rules. We've testified on this legislation a number of times. We're really grateful to see it before the committee and hope that if it passes the committee this week, it can get to the House floor later this year. The third bill that we're interested in is our Financial Institution Examination Fairness Act. This bill is the one that sets up an independent ombudsman at the Federal Financial Institution Examination Council and an independent appeals process so that credit unions don't have to appeal their exam complaints to their examiner supervisor. They can appeal it to an independent body. As with the qualified mortgage bill, we've testified on this legislation a number of times, so it's great to get it through the process even more. The final bill deals with the TILA-RESPA integrated disclosure requirements. We've talked a lot about TRID over the last couple of weeks because we're approaching the October 3 implementation deadline. What this bill would do is it would extend the effective date into next year, and it would also include a hold harmless period so that as credit unions transition to the new requirements, they're not going to be liable for mistakes that they might make along the way. One of the weaknesses of the current system is that there is a date on which you've got to flip a switch. So on October 2, credit unions are lending one way, and on October 3, they've got to use a new set of forms and new sets of requirements. What this bill does is it pushes that out into the first part of next year and allows for a transition period. We're very strongly supportive of this legislation. There are several pending regulatory proposals that are open for comment that we're encouraging credit unions to weigh in on. 3 of them are at the NCUA and 1 is at the Department of Labor. The NCUA proposals cover their AGRIPA review, their member business lending proposal, and their annual regulatory review process. The comments for the annual 1/3 regulatory review process are due on August 3rd. CUNA will be submitting their comments ahead of that deadline. We're going to talk about a number of issues that NCUA has asked for comment on. We'll also be raising concerns regarding the low-income credit union designation and field of membership. The member business lending proposal, that comment period comes up at the beginning of September. Over the course of the next month, we're going to be listening to credit unions that do business lending to hear their concerns about the MBL proposal. We'll be holding a webinar later in August to discuss the proposal with credit unions, and we'll file our comments in advance of the September 3rd deadline on that. At the Department of Labor, they have proposed significant changes to minimum wage and overtime regulations. Credit unions should definitely look at that proposal to see how it would impact them. The deadline for the Department of Labor rule is later in September, so we'll be putting out more information regarding that proposal as we get closer to the deadline. For credit unions that are interested in commenting on these proposals, we've partnered with the California Credit Union League to produce a website called Power Comment. PowerComment.org is the address. You can go on that website to get all the information about the regulations, draft comment letters. There are talking points and key questions to answer in the comments. It's a one-stop shop for advocating before our regulators. We encourage folks to visit PowerComment.org.